Right, so in yesterday's video, I was addressing the question of, what the interest really is. And I was having this indirect conversation with one of my viewers who had suggested or observed that interstices are synonymous with eureka moments, the famous eureka moments. So a lot of people in the personality community writ large would be familiar with the NI eureka moments because they're kind of part of the language. They're part of ordinary type speech, whereas the interstice is kind of just Ren speech at this point. Now, that being said, what I emphasized in yesterday's video is that it's not exactly true that the eureka moments and the interstice are synonyms. All eureka moments are interstitial experiences, but not all interstices are eureka moments, right? And in yesterday's video, I gave the example of just me talking to my boss and what happened there. More broadly speaking, how can we make this idea of the interstice or the interstitial moments a bit more concrete? We've acknowledged now that eureka moments are in that category, but there's not just eureka moments. Eureka moments are mostly inner experiences, whereas a lot of interstitial experiences are more outer, or a dynamic interplay between outer and inner. And how to link this notion with the notion of spiritualization, that is to say, the notion of becoming an individual, individuating, becoming a mature human being, transcending transcending our neurosis that we've been carrying since early childhood for perhaps most of us. I think that perhaps because this notion of the interstice is basically as slippery, it's real. I know that. I'm convinced of that. That's why I insist on it. But it's in some ways it's just as slippery as NI itself. It's a product of NI. It's an object of NI. It's in the landscape of NI experience. And in that sense, to try to encapsulate it is as a difficult and slippery an undertaking as the attempt to define NI. You notice that people are hungry for definitions of NI because they're never satisfied with just one definition. I mean, I'm in the process of starting to write notes for a whole book on the NI function, and it's going to be long and it's going to be demanding, and it's going to be probably my most demanding book, but also my most potentially rewarding book, and that's really what I want it to be. But I'm going to go deep, and I'm sure that I still won't have said all that can be said about NI. Hopefully I will have said a lot of things that are thought-provoking, stimulating. Perhaps some of that stuff will be provocative and controversial, but if I can provoke thoughts, if I can stimulate thought, that's the main goal, and I'm pretty sure I will, but I won't have said everything that has to be said about NI, and that's because NI is a slippery function, partly because of its very intimate relationship with the whole domain of the unconscious. Of course, the unconscious is slippery, and because the interstice happens at this kind of interface between inner experience and the outer world, it's slippery as well for the NI dominant. So let's start with its relationship with individuation. So I think that there is no doubt that you cannot, as an NI dominant, you cannot spiritualize, you cannot individuate. These are synonyms when we talk about NI dominance. You cannot individuate, become a true individual in Jungian parlance, if you don't learn to invest the interstices. That's more my parlance. So if you are an NI dominant, let's say an INFJ who is very, very compliant, you spend so much energy complying, adapting to what you perceive others to want from you, that you're certainly not going to pay much attention to situations where you feel oddly energized all of a sudden, and you feel a drive to talk in NI speech. Now these are two very clear, as far as I can see, two very clear signs, right? Two items of evidence of the manifestation of an interstice, an opportunity for an interstitial experience. You invest it by, first of all, noticing that you experience a spike in energy and a spike in desire, which are deeply linked, right? Desire is more psychological than energy, but desire in a sense is the psychological side of that spike in energy. And often the desire expresses itself in this need or strong temptation to speak in NI talk, to use NI speech. So more associative speech, more metaphorical speech, more cryptic speech, more illustrative speech, imagistic speech. Like I said, very much speech that is about association, and often association of patterns, of themes, for example, in actual spoken language. Themes or objects that won't seem obvious in their connection to other people. That's NI speech, and we can make more videos about how NI speaks, true NI speaks. NI speech is like, so potentially dangerous for the compliant, and the compliant's needs to remain socially integrated and socially validated and accepted, that the compliant tends to avoid all temptation to speak NI. It means frustration, but they are willing to pay that price. One of the risks is that at some point they may even forget NI speech, a bit like sometimes when you're not speaking a language for a long time, then it gets really rusty, Now, when it comes to your mother tongue, even if you don't speak it for years, you never quite lose it, and it comes back quickly if you practice it. Luckily for NI dominance, that's the way NI speech works. But nevertheless, compliance and solipsists tend to bar themselves from the opportunity to practice proper NI speech. Compliance for the reasons I gave, solipsists because they use NI speech into the void, they have no interlocutors. And that actually completely amputates, it neuters, it sterilizes the potency of NI speech to open up a proper interstice and to invest the interstitial experience. Right? You could describe an individuated NI dominance, an NI dominant that has become a full individual in Jungian parlance, as an NI dominant who's speaks a lot of NI speech, and yet that does not come into conflict with adaptation. In other words, they're the most attuned with their own authentic being. They don't feel at the back of their mind that they're betraying themselves. So they feel this inner sense of being replenished by their own practice of NI speech, among other things. But in the outer world, it does not mean that they're going to lose their job. It doesn't mean that they're going to lose their friends. It doesn't mean that, no, the two have been combined. That's individuation for NI dominance, right? And as we will see in the next video, one of the reasons why there's no how-to guide to do this is that it's a matter of training. It's a matter of training your NI, training your NI speech, and training your NI discernment of interstices. When it's a matter of training, it means you need to train. There's no how-to guide on how to develop like a ripped body within a day. Like developing a ripped body is actually not that complicated, but you need to train. And as we will see, that's also how it works with interstices and therefore with spiritualization. Guys, give me a like if you enjoyed this video. You know it helps massively with the referencing. Don't forget to support me on Patreon. It's massively important to me to keep the channel going. You get cool perks like access to the Discord server and now a large vault of exclusive videos by me for the patrons. The link is below to my Patreon for just a couple bucks a month or a year, and my 2 books on the INFJ, on the outer world of the INFJ, the Infinite Soul, and on the inner world of the INFJ, the Ecstatic Soul. These two books are really essential if you want a deep understanding of the INFJ personality, and if you like my content, you will love them. Link below, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.